Hello and welcome to my webinar, Navigating Difficult Situations. I'm Dr. Kathy Obear with the Center for Transformation and Change. And please just take a deep breath. And I invite you to just focus on the lands where you are. I'm here in Denver, Colorado, and so I'm feeling deep gratitude for the original indigenous caretakers, the Arapaho, Cheyenne, the Ute, and just sitting with the historical racism, genocide, and the current continuing racism, colonization. So just a deep breath. I hope as we begin 2020, you're feeling more rested. You're feeling more relaxed after this winter holiday. I know I was. In a few days, kind of a couple weeks in, as I started back to work, I had just a really significant, difficult situation. And I was calm, peaceful, clear, smiling, being very gracious and understanding. And then later I was shocked at how untriggered I was, because it's the type of situation that can really get under my skin. But when I'm feeling good, when I'm present, I've had some good sleep, I'm much more likely to pause, show up useful, engaging. My energy helps the other person not be triggered. I gather information, think thoughtfully, and I make a conscious choice, intentional, how I can help with dynamics. But here's my real question. How long does that afterglow last? After a vacation, a winter break, a long weekend? The answer is not long enough. More often than not, after a few days, back at work, back in community, organizing, whatever you're doing, when a stressful situation happens, we get knocked off our game, sometimes that quickly in a snap. And all too often, we react in unproductive ways that fuels the fire, increases the tension, dysfunction, as opposed to resolving the issues. And so I use the language of triggered. When we become overly stressed, we hit a hot button. It could be under my skin. You reach a boiling point, you're off guard, whatever you want to call it. It's when we tend to overreact, underreact, and we lose control to navigate our emotions. Now, let me be clear. I'm not talking about stuffing emotions. I'm talking about being present enough to what we're feeling, not knocked off our thinking, and have a balance. And sometimes that means de-escalating a bit so we can really have a balance between intentional thought and be present to the emotions as a sign of information to really find out what's going on for us. But we lose the ability to think clearly when we are not paying attention, we're not present, we're knocked off our game. And so we react on impulse, knee-jerk reactions. And mismanaged triggering moments, dysfunctional situations, conflict distract us, distract others from the core work we need to do. And to be honest, what is much more important to me is the folks that are impacted by the hot buttons, whether it's others or our reaction to them. The cumulative impact of those type of dysfunctional situations, increasing tension, conflict, the microaggressions, dismissive treatment, leave people feeling undervalued, dismissed, invalidated, disrespected, unsettled, so deeply impacted that there's that revolving door. And you may not even know the current climate in your team, organization, until people are in an exit interview, even if they tell you then. So think back, a recent meeting, a workshop, workplace discussions. Have you personally ever felt that hot button? You were so nervous or scared, you shut down, missed key opportunities to create change, to intervene in the moment, de-escalate the tension in the room, navigate difficult situations? Or more likely, like me, if you are like me, you found yourself irritated and you moved into the fight mode, so you might have blurted out something you later regretted or said something really snarky and sarcastic, because I like being funny, but boy, I can use sarcasm kind of as a weapon. Not kind of, I can use it as a weapon. So it's so common in difficult situations that we react less effectively, other people react less effectively, and then we're just bumping or we're all running away. And we do it especially when other people's behaviors cross a line, and or policy or practice, the climate just has such a negative impact, and we've been trying to change it, but the cumulative impact of that same policy or practice. So individual, group, and organizational levels, we can be impacted and have difficult situations. Now, sometimes we can navigate our emotions in the moment in ways that we respond helpful ways, it moves the organization, and we're aligned with our core values. That's what I mean by reacting effectively. But that takes a lot of skill, a lot of practice. And I've been teaching this now almost 30 years. And I still have days, moments that I know all this here, but to put into practice takes all that I have to pay attention. And there are other days I just react in ways I later regret. In a snap, during toxic workplace situations, we react without thinking. And I do that too on automatic pilot, say and do things that undermine organizational goals. And it's not only consequences at the individual level, there are huge consequences at the system level. And so just think about your own work environment, or maybe one that you left. The difficult situations, mismanaged, unmanaged, which is mismanaged, damages work relationships, possibly beyond repair. People hold grudges, there's gossip, the meeting after the meeting, and the meeting after the meeting after the meeting, where people start having cliques and trying to organize people to be on their side instead of what's best for the organization. A lot of lower morale and motivation, and that is impacting so many people's mental health, whether it's a diagnosed mental health illness and or depletion, some type of just low energy, and other issues around mental health, low self-care, low passion. People are going to avoid working with each other. I know I did when I was in organizations. I'd look inside a meeting and decide who I'd sit with, who I talked with. And if the meeting did not have the people I liked, I might have skipped it as well. And so it impacts our collaboration. There's less and less trust. And so that's really impacting the quality of our work, our services to our clients, our customers, and clearly undermining the quality of work. Also, with all the power plays, it really undermines productivity. And we're fighting over minute details, who's right, who's wrong, as opposed to what the organization really needs. I don't know about you, but I obsess. So if something's going on, it's not resolved, I'm spinning the moment after that night, I take it home. And then when I'm around people, it really impacts creativity and innovation. So deep breath. Because all these dynamics, if they're not addressed, will sabotage the real work we're here to do. And so my hope for you is you realize you're not alone, that literally in the last 3.5 decades, most every organization I've ever worked with has been somewhere on that continuum, from mild dysfunction, medium, to so extreme. All we're talking about today will probably not be useful to some people, but these skills will still be useful to engage in the moment and get clear to think what type of more intense, possibly long-term intervention needs to do to clean up all the dysfunction and then recreate a healthy, inclusive, high-performing organization. So I hope you realize it's a common experience. More often than not, we all respond less effectively at times, if not often, and you're not destined to react that way. There are tools that can help you navigate situations, not suffer fools any longer, and more importantly, when you are feeling overwhelmed, when you are knocked off your game, I'm going to share tools to navigate your own triggered hot button emotions before you feel so exhausted, burned out, cynical that you start looking for a new job. Now, let me be clear, moving to another organization may be the best choice right now. But if you want tools to stay in the organization or to take with you, if you move, then I really think paying attention to these tools, reading my book, Turn the Tide, on my website are also lots of worksheets. They're in the back of the book, like the last half is, it's very small though. So whether you download the book, they'll be bigger, or use it from my website. Lots of resources for yourself as well as others. There is a way out. There's a way through to greater individual satisfaction, feeling good about the organization, and organizational effectiveness. Accessible, proven tools. If you learn and practice, share with others, they can become second nature. Here's what we're doing today. My intent in the first half, I'm calling it part one, is to share some strategies to de-escalate those difficult situations in the early stages. Again, these tools will be useful much of the time everywhere, but if your organization is in such a dysfunctional, toxic state, and you've tried most everything, there's probably going to have to be a significant intervention, which is the work that I do. I can recommend others through HR, all sorts of places but you need to be talking closely with HR on buds if your organization is so dysfunctional and you just have the revolving door. But if it's kind of low dysfunction to middle dysfunction and you see some hope, then these tools and skills you individually and teach can help you de-escalate so that everybody can think differently, but also we engage what's really going on even if others are triggered, especially if they're triggered. And then the second half, it'll be you as an instrument of change. We are the most important dynamic in any difficult situations. If we can navigate our untriggered reactions, then we consciously, intentionally choose how to respond instead of an automatic pilot knee-jerk reaction. So that's where we are headed. If you're a manager, a trainer, you facilitate groups, employee resource groups, if you're a change agent, and as you're doing this, you're like, I want more time, I want more tools, and mostly I want to be able to have live time with Kathy to do what do you do if, and here's a generic situation, what do you recommend, and how do we scaffold that over a couple months? That's what I'll be doing. And at the end, I'm going to share more about a mini course that I'm starting the end of January, on January 31st, 2020, that you can come to individually and or have a number of people sign up individually and meet as a cohort to experience it 3 Fridays in a row. I'll tell you more at the end. Now, all these tools I'm teaching, I never had growing up. And even when I was in my master's program, being trained to be a teacher in my undergrad, and then as I was a manager, I did not get these tools. But today, more and more folks, especially in corporations and other places, are talking about these tools and skills as critical leadership skills. And they're talking about them with a frame of emotional intelligence, or EQ. EQ may be a lot more. This is a key subset. And to be honest, as I've studied EQ, what I talk about, particularly about navigating our intrapersonal roots, doing the healing work, I think is really value added to most folks that have written about this work. So the research I've been seeing is that having emotional intelligence, these skills, is a strong indicator and a predictor of success for individual practitioners, contributors, leaders. And so we're finding more and more people are asking questions in the interview process. As they're scanning past experience, talking to references, they're really looking for the kind of skills, capacity we're talking about today. Google, who I still believe, I think still does great work in the world on equity inclusion in general. They did years of research. What are the top management skills we want to be looking for? And they came up with 6, and emotional intelligence was one of those critical skill sets. They intentionally hire and teach towards those. Other research has showed that these leaders with emotional intelligence have 40% greater performance individually and collectively in their area. That's significant. And finally, they're finding it sets high performers apart. When we have emotional intelligence, the tools and skills, we'll be talking about people then are more present to use all their technical knowledge, all their competence in other areas, as well as help create and effectively work with high-performing, inclusive teams. So, whether using these skills for coaching, mentoring, managing stress, innovation, really building great customer service, you might be wondering, if all the research says this is true, then why don't all leaders and managers really consistently demonstrate emotional intelligence? You can think about all the leaders you've done. You can look at yourself. How come we're not doing this? Well, it's one thing to know, and it's another thing to integrate and do. And my guess is you've worked with all kinds of training and development over the years. You personally know or know in your organization, cognitive learning is necessary but not sufficient. We have to get skill practice and get it into our bodies, and then how to implement it day to day. If you're finding resistance to these type of trainings, skill development, getting it into your hiring and performance management, then Brené Brown's message may be useful, especially if people love Brené, as many are. Leaders must either invest a reasonable amount of time in attending to the fears and feelings of individuals, groups, culture, climate in the organization, or leaders are going to squander an unreasonable amount of time trying to manage ineffective behavior, unproductive behavior, and I want to suggest systemic oppression. So it is critical that as leaders, change agents, we do our own work and train and teach these skills to everybody so that we are creating inclusive organizations in general, and we have the skills to navigate difficult situations, particularly when they're in the early stages. So what I'm going to do in this first half is look at the toolkit. Because when I am clear centered, I have a wide variety of tools. You'll get a lot today. You'll get far more in the mini course. And I have even more in some of my other books. I'm going to share some of my favorite go-tos that I use to de-escalate myself, de-escalate the situation so we can focus on organizational norms. Now, over the years, if you've been around me for decades, you've known I've had different acronyms to remember these tools, because when I'm in a difficult situation, particularly if I'm feeling triggered, tools kind of fly out of my mind. So my latest is PAIRS. Panning, pay attention now. Asking questions, interrupting, relating in, and sharing, using our self as the tool, self as instrument. And so I'm just going to walk through these. You may want to be taking screenshots in addition to be listening, and or you just may want to be present and taking notes, whatever's helpful. PAIRS. So panning is the first key skills, and I did not know this for, I'll bet, a good 10 years as I started this work as a consultant in the late 80s. I was really interacting with people at the individual level. I was thinking about diversity, but I did not get group level dynamics, much less systemic oppression and how to create inclusive organizations. It was really LCY Cross Associates taught me a lot. And when I was a part of them, this skill called tracking is what they talk about. I've shifted just a couple things to it. I call it pay attention now, because that acronym helps me remember to be present to myself and notice the behaviors and practices, policies, services around me. You know, we're in a meeting and we're talking. So what's really the individual dynamics I'm seeing by group membership? How are people showing up differently, reacting differently, and being treated differently? And then to be able, this is a key part, to begin to gather facts, what's really going on, not what I'm making up my story. We'll come back to this as we do step 3 in my cycle of a triggering event. So not making up what I think is going on, but in fact, what truly are the behaviors, just the fact. If we had a video camera that we could replay for this last moment, what would we all agree happened on that video camera? And then be able to hear and talk really honestly about, is that a fact or is that an assumption? What if we took a picture, what would we have seen if we had 30 seconds of a multiple panoramic picture? So no judgment, no interpretation, no assumption, easier said than done, but teaching the skill to others, practicing it yourself. When I'm in a difficult situation and I can breathe and say, can we all just take a moment? I just want to reflect on what just happened, and here's my understanding of what happened. And I know I was impacted. I wonder if others were. I trust it wasn't folks' intent, but it's outside of how we've agreed to work together. So here's what I saw. That skill to be able to say either individually what happened or at the group level what you saw, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, what we mean, the patterns, but also individual events. So that's what panning is for me. It's critical that I scan the room, much less pan myself, to get all the facts of what's happening and consider all those as I'm choosing how to respond. I have sometimes responded, and I am an extrovert often. And so in a moment, I'll see something and respond quickly. But what I realized later is I didn't see the 2 or 3 things that happened before the moment that I responded to. So to be able to see the nonverbal reactions of people, to pause and see what data am I missing, to diagnose what's going on, maybe for others individually and at the group level, and then base my choice of response on all that I've gathered. And again, that could be in the 30 seconds reflection. We don't necessarily always have to respond as quickly. And sometimes if I feel that urgency, that's a sign that I actually am triggered and I'm not thinking clearly. So for instance, if you notice someone has been quiet and you're like, they're usually involved. And then I'm like, oh, 5 minutes ago, they offered an idea I thought was pretty good, but I was distracted by my phone beeping. And I realized no one followed up on it, and I didn't think to come back. So if I want to be really indirect, I could just look over, because you might know them and they don't like to be called out. So just look over in their direction and said, Loving the conversation. Anybody else have anything to add or anything that's been mentioned already that we need to reconsider? I wouldn't have done all that if I hadn't noticed the dynamic of the plop as well as a person not verbally participating for a while. So again, a very indirect intervention. Using panning, we don't have to be direct. We don't have to name the gender dynamics, the class dynamics, the race dynamics. I'll show you some examples to do that. But I generally find, in this case, just a gentle invite in. Now, if they don't come in, you can get a little more direct. Actually, I'm rethinking something, Julie, that you said that I'm not sure we considered because I'm really liking it. And now that I hear their ideas, I'd like to bring it back in. Do you want to say more about what you were thinking, especially how it integrates to what we've been talking since? So I can add a second part if that gentle invite in didn't get an address, especially if Julie by hierarchy is in a lower level position or a Latina or a new person, and I could keep going. So if we're observant at the group level, we're noticing that. For instance, if you notice only 2 or 3 people have been talking among themselves and for about 5 minutes and everybody else is sitting back, you can just share, I'm loving these ideas and I'm noticing it's mostly the most senior in the room. So what I want to do is why don't we pause a moment and everybody take a moment to reflect on what's going on, maybe write down a couple of their ideas and maybe turn to a partner and then let's collect up. We're always better when we have tons of ideas, especially across hierarchical levels, especially with folks that are going to be implementing these decisions. So notice how I'm naming the intent I have, but I'm naming hierarchy. And as you know, as you move down, quote, the hierarchy, you have more folks of marginalized identity. So it's an indirect way to also get more folks either by race or hierarchical level, class, gender identity, disability status, years of experience, age, get more voices in. Again, we're not calling out the senior leaders. We're not putting them in the spot, but we are raising awareness of what we're panning, a group level pan that we think is undermining what could be useful as we're making decisions. So you might have noticed I'm already sharing some strategies at the individual level where we're not naming group identity, but I've now shared a couple where I might start at the individual level, but then I add some group identities. I actually think it is so helpful in inclusive teams, organizations. They're wanting to get to be higher performing, then you modeling how to name some group identities that you're noticing that you wonder if there's more of a negative impact. You're not, again, calling people racist or sexist. You're naming the group identities and the dynamics and getting people to realize, oh, didn't even notice it was just 2 of us who were senior leaders and we've worked together for 25 years. We were kind of debating with each other. You're helping people be even more effective. So let's say in the last couple minutes, you noticed that a couple people were interrupted and you were just waiting to see if anybody else would come in because you're always the one that comes in. And then you saw someone's ideas plopped. No one followed up. You can direct at the individual level, say, can we slow down? I really liked what you said. Could you say more? You could also say, I'm noticing I'm having trouble hearing folks because we're moving more quickly than I'm able to keep up. Can we slow down and can people kind of build on what was said before? So notice I'm offering other ways to engage without necessarily directly calling out the folks that are interrupting, but I gently said, using myself as instrument, by the way. And at the group level, you can take that same situation and be a bit more direct. So full breadth of differences, and this doesn't even cover all of them. But you can think about what are the differences among the folks in the room, where are the pain points in the organization, and as the leader, change agent, have those more in your heart as you're watching. And then in the situation I just shared, if you were watching it at the group level from the trifocals, you're like, so yeah, interrupting and a plopped idea, but now I think about it, most folks are newer in the organization, so they're marginalized by years of experience, and they're not senior leaders and mid-level, they're more individual contributors. Now that I think it with a race lens, 2 are folk of color, one's a Latina, one's an African-American man, and one's a white guy. Ooh, but he uses a cane. Is this an isolated incident or one-time event? Or is this a pattern around those group identities and who is seen, who gets interrupted, whose ideas get followed up on, who's acknowledged? So it's just interesting data that you're panning. And if you notice it's a pattern or a part of the overall culture, have that in you as you might intervene and say something like, just want to pause. I know we've committed to inclusive engagement agreements, and I don't know if other folks noticed, but I just noticed a couple folks getting interrupted who were newer, some folk of color, some white, some other issues going on. Notice I'm extroverting, but I didn't name that he uses a cane. I think unintentionally, I wondered if that would be too much calling out someone with a disability. So take it for what it's worth. I was extroverting in the moment. And so I just might notice and say, I know for me, when I'm interrupted, I usually shut down and get irritated. So I'd like us to slow down, and I'd like to hear more from the folks whose ideas, because to be honest, the newer folks in an organization, to me, see the culture, the climate, and their perspectives usually help me think outside the box. So if you notice, I just used my hierarchical privilege and years of experience privilege to create a container. So panning can help us diagnose, pause to see a few more of the ideas, get a video instead of just snap judgment, and then choose how I want to respond. And also panning might help me not be so triggered because I'm like, ooh, that happened, but wait, that happened. Oh, I did this beforehand. That might be why. Just gather as much information as you can and trust that the group will go with you, particularly if you have some privileged identities, to go back and take care of a dysfunctional dynamic that happened. So here are some of the tools that I'm using all the time, plus there are more that you'll get. I think it's almost a 100-page packet that I'm doing in the course. You can be panning at the group level. Who's talking? First, who's here, who's not here? Whose ideas, like we've talked about, who's sharing, who's maybe not sharing verbally, who's not talking much, who's changed their behavior. What are the nonverbal reactions? I'm always looking at who's looking at who when someone's talking. And if I notice a dysfunctional behavior, I might notice who's looking at who, more data before I intervene. Again, whose ideas considered? You can probably tell how many times I've talked about this, as well as interrupting. Those are personal hot buttons of mine. So plopping, when I was inside organizations and even on teams, I was on a national board, my ideas often plopped. And I noticed, particularly when I was challenging the group to live up to its core values in different ways. Now, people may have disagreed, thought they were, but I was seeing systemic oppression, racism, and gender identity issues. And when I called them out, my ideas plopped. Who never gets interrupted? Who does the interrupting? Who always, by group level, seems to get interrupted? Who gets airtime? Who doesn't? Who changed their behavior recently? So all of these and others are tools and skills that I just now have as habits and automatic, that when I'm training, when I'm in a meeting, when I'm on a Zoom call, phone, I'm listening for. And it's harder on a phone because I can't see, but literally I was just on a Zoom and I noticed the white male, I assumed heterosexual cisgender, spoke more often than the two white women. Actually, it was a white woman and a black woman who had the most senior level, or at least a peer in the organization. He spoke more often. He challenged me. He disagreed with me, again, with a smile. But you know when you feel the energy, and I'm like, he's kind of one up in here. So I was playing to his ego and made sure that we got the work done. But I can tell so much more in person or on Zoom. And so having these skills, practicing them, teaching them, and then using those to help you decide how you want to respond. So a couple more strategies that I do might be, I'm appreciating the different perspectives, but I'm beginning to notice. So notice appreciation and then the pan. I'm beginning to notice a few people repeating themselves, including me. I know I do that when either I don't feel heard or I want my way. So I don't know. What I suggest is, what if we table this, all think about it, and then come back fresh and new at our next meeting? Or does someone else have another idea? Or what are you all noticing about our group dynamics? I might even say after that, if we are table, let's move on to the next agenda. Because especially if I'm leading, I might be holding, like, we have a lot more to talk about. I might say this conversation is beginning to feel, I don't know, a little off topic to me. Could we park it on how other people are feeling? And what I'm realizing is I don't know enough. And so if we end up wanting to move in this direction, I'd love us to maybe a small group while I also do a little research so we come back with a few more ideas what other peer organizations are doing. I don't know. What do y'all think? Does that sound reasonable? And if they're like, yeah, so let's get back to what we're talking about. Again, I might be panning that a few people in resistance and budding and perfectly logical explanation. So I might be noticing fragility, and I'm using this as the way to get the group back on, knowing that meeting after the meeting, when it's useful, I might go one-on-one to talk with some folks whose behavior was beginning to, in my mind, show up not as useful, as well as the whole group can do research. If you notice a few people seem to be speaking more than others, again, another hot button of mine, dominating, speaking over, I might say, I'm beginning to notice a few people are talking more often. Are y'all noticing? And I have a sense, again, I'm using self as instrument. I'm not calling people out. I'm just saying I have a sense some folks have shut down or started looking at their phones. And so I'm appreciating the comments, and I'd love some more voices in. So why don't we just pause? How's our group dynamics right now? And am I off? Or are there some things that we could be doing differently to get more conversation and maybe more what's under the surface not being said? Now, you notice I'm panning at the group level, but I'm not using it in my intervention. I often tend to start with as indirect as I think will move the group. If I have a lot of history with the group and I know that mid-directness or significant directness is what's needed, or in the moment, if something happens, and sometimes I go very direct, but I try to scaffold it, because what I know is with my personality and group identities, and I have so much privilege, when I go direct, there's usually a ton of resistance, fragility, which isn't good or bad, but then you got to work with all that. And usually I'm in a workshop, so I want to get people on board, acknowledge and dissipate that dysfunction as soon as possible. And if it's a pattern, we can talk about it more in a retreat or in a focus staff meeting where we're really looking at how well are we doing, where are we effective, when aren't we, what could we do it differently. That's a great intervention if your group is kind of moderately dysfunction to low, but a lot of dynamics lately get your attention. Just a good staff retreat where we get honest. In the moment, if you're doing interventions, let's say people are debating, raising their voices, you might get a little more direct by saying, I need to pause because I'm noticing people are cutting each other off. We've raised our voices and my heart is beating. And I'm feeling a sense of urgency to get in. And I know that when I do that, I'm usually triggered and not helpful. Can we just pause? We seem to be violating some group norms, but am I the only one feeling this way? Or another direct, I need us to kind of stop and slow down. I'm noticing a pattern that I've seen a number of times. When we finally get to talk about race, 90% of the time, it's the colleagues of color that bring it up. And I just noticed again, a colleague of color brought it up. And the pattern I notice is when race starts to come up in our group, somebody, and I bet it's 100% of the time, one of us whites changes the subject either to our marginalized identity or goes to some defensiveness, or in this case, what I experienced was a perfectly logical explanation why that employee data had nothing to do with race and it was about class instead. And I just need us to stop, pause, and can we just talk about what just happened as well as what was going on for the folks who were wanting to move off of race? Because I know we need to keep race-centered in our work. Now, as I just extroverted that's pretty direct. And if these indirect ways don't go, and or it's something egregious, and or you notice folks with different marginalized identities look deeply impacted, triggered in the moment, particularly in our privileged identities, I think we have a responsibility to move in, step up, share leadership, but not expect the folks out of marginalized identities to always be the one to lead. Now, if you miss it, always be the second and say, thank you, I missed it, but I hear you. We need to stop and talk about this, or I agree. So be the second and the third person if you're not the first. So panning, sharing what we pan, again, using to diagnose, indirect to direct, however you want to do it, can help everybody pause, recognize dynamics, and get back on track. And then keep a note of what they are so that when you're ready to do, I think 3 times a year to do a good half day. How are we doing? What else? How do we better work together? And then some strategic planning, if you have time left, can be proactive ways to navigate difficult situations. But it takes intentional team development in order for a group to hold the kind of direct interventions, especially the last one, but even some of the other ones that I did. So panning is the first skill of pairs. Now asking. This might be the one you know the most about if you're mentoring, coaching, in a supervisory relationship. But when there's a difficult situation, I find people go to telling as opposed to using the skills they have and maybe some others I'm offering. So it's my go-to skill when I'm facilitating or on a Zoom call and I'm noticing tension and I'm centered, because I get a lot more information to know where I need to go next. And if I am beginning to feel mild or even medium triggered, helps me breathe, hear the other person, do some stress release. So everybody wins when I ask questions. So here's some of my go-to. If you find that you're not understanding, group isn't, these are common ones, my guess you do. Can you say more? Help me understand. Getting concrete examples can get folks out of their heads, a little more in their bodies, maybe not in their feelings yet, but specificity really helps. If we're arguing concepts, you're going to go down that rabbit hole, and it'll be hard to get back. So asking for an example, saying, I'm with you on the idea. I work better with examples. Can you give me one so that maybe I can learn what you're talking about more, and then maybe we can go back up to the concepts? Before you then enter more telling or giving an opinion, I like to clarify, are you saying that? Another way to get more specifics, especially if the tell me more isn't working, it's like, well, can you give me some background information? Often folks enter, as I have, and I still do, at an idea. And this is what we need to do. Well, can you just back it up a bit? Help me understand your intention. Help me understand some background information. My guess is you have more data than I have. The variation of help me understand how you came to that conclusion could be another way to say it. If you're in an academic institution, asking what's our organizational research data and what other research do we have, or other good practices from other organizations that's kind of fueling this idea. So you're honoring the idea, you're just trying to get everybody else hearing it, because when people put a stake in the ground, this is what we know, this is what we need to know, this is what we need to do, it's going to take a bit to back out of that. So intervening early before we get this, we're stake of the ground, I'm right, you're wrong. And getting getting the person to share what's in them so that the whole group can maybe go, oh, that's interesting. So that their final idea may not be where you end up, but you get to hear more that you might agree on about intent and strategy. To be honest, then the better idea may come with more people participating. If you find that folks are still kind of going back, debating or disagreeing or shut down, you might go back and say, so I'm feeling some tension because there's some disagreement. And I know that when we hear each other, when we're disagreeing, sometimes the best ideas come. So I'd love folks to share more about what you're disagreeing with or what you're finding frustrating. And we'll just pause in the decision-making to really explore, because the best idea might come as we're kind of moving back and forth and really in respectful listening. So you notice I'm reminding them of their norms. And then if folks, as I have been, I'm remembering this one time I was like, no, we have to do this. And I put a stake in. Now, I do still believe I was right. If someone has said, tell us more about why you feel so strongly, I might have said, if we publish that, there is blatant transphobic material in there, and it's going to reflect on us in as an organization. And that is one of our many ways we're trying to be more inclusive around race and indigenous and transgender and others. And if our publishing, I don't care if it's a blog, if our publishing violates what we say we are, we're going to lose membership And the energy we've already gotten from folks asking us and challenging us to be better will only increase. That's why I love this organization. I believe in what we're doing. And I'm afraid we're cutting, I don't like that metaphor. I'm afraid we're undermining and sabotaging what we really want. If someone had asked me in that moment, I would have paused and gotten out of this fight, right, wrong, and maybe been able to share. And to be honest, at that point, I might have said, I hear myself repeating myself. I see that I'm the only one that believes this. Okay. And I would have, lived to fight another day, hopefully. Now, I don't know if you all know National Coalition Building Institute. I don't know, a decade or two ago, I went to a workshop, NCBI. They had a powerful one. It's the last one. They were having real-time folks across privileged, marginalized identity talking. And then we got to notice that they were in their heads of conceptual and actually kind of disagreeing about how to move forward or what is racism. And so the tool they then were taught to practice was, well, can you tell me a story? So it relates to, can you give me an example? But the tell me a story behind why you feel so strongly, or tell me, shifted the energy from the head to the heart so quickly. So I just want to highlight that one. However you're engaging folks, as we have escalating tension and difficult situations and triggers in the room, if we can slow down, hear each other, use questions, people will feel more heard, and they're likely to feel heard, especially as they're telling a story. We're building connection, and then we may be able to de-escalate and then find a way through. Some of my more useful questions: what's your intended outcome? Why is that? And how does what you think relate to our overall goals, our strategic plan? As people are brainstorming or debating, asking people to use connection. So how does what you're doing and saying connect to what we're talking about or what was just said? And then occasionally in a difficult situation, a person feels like it's a tangent. So I've just said, I've engaged the resistance, and I just said, so let's play that out. What could that look like? Because here's the truth. I may not know. And so I'm actually in low humility. And the group who's maybe against it already may not see the potential. So if we just kind of, instead of being a knot, gently pull it apart and pull out a couple of those yarn strings. So let's play it out. If we move in that direction, what could it look like? How about everybody just takes a moment, reflect, then turn to a partner and let's build it. We may not end up doing it, or maybe we'll do part of it, but what could it look like? And then what would be the impact and outcome if we do? So I would build it first, and maybe a chart. What could it look like? I actually think that's a great creativity strategy. It respects the person who is so clear that their idea is the best idea. And to be honest, it may help them realize, ooh, there's some holes I didn't think of. So, and then finally, if folks are in debate mode and just not hearing each other, you can ask the question, is there a question or a concern behind your statement? I hear you very strongly talking. Concern or question behind it that might help us really hear each other. All of these questions can help you gather more information, the group build, connect, hear each other, and the person who may be the one whose behavior is the trigger to slow down and share more so that folks can hear them as opposed to the initial snap judgment. So all these can help a group when it's pretty early to early middle in dysfunction. There are individual moments that, I don't care where the group is, need to be interrupted. And all of these questions and painting are interrupting, but the official third part of pairs is clear, direct interrupting. Now, it can still be with a style that's gentle, or sometimes my energy is like this, and I might model one of those. So I saw a comic that I use in a lot of my workshops. It's a psychiatrist in an office and an elephant laying down on the couch, and the elephant is saying, most times, even if I stand in the middle of the room, no one acknowledges me. And what I love about that is it's a metaphor elephant in the room. And I don't know about you, in my history, there's still been times, meetings, conversations, workshops, something happens. Either I don't hear how intense it is and I need to interrupt, or in the past, I've scared myself into flight and freeze, or I've kind of bumbled and fumbled. I haven't interrupted as clearly as today I have the tools and skills. And so when something crosses a line, is clearly unproductive, offensive, or exacerbates a difficult situation, often no one speaks up or acknowledges, and we have to. So it could be simple as, come again? Sorry, I missed what you were saying. And if we ask the person to repeat themselves, they're like, they'll have heard themselves, and as they think what to say, they may say it differently. And then I can say, well, I'm glad I asked, because the first time I heard you, this is what I heard. And then I might pause and then see what they say. Because it's not to smooth over the conflict, but to have them ready to be in the conversation. And then I might say, I trust your intent wasn't, but let me talk about the impact. And I guess you impacted others, so I'd like to slow down. Now, other ways, can you help me understand what you meant by that? Or I think I've said something similar in the past. I know it's been an impact, a negative microaggression. And so I may have misunderstood you, but can you say it again? In that way, usually privilege to privilege, I'm giving the person a heads up that we're about to go there, so that they might prepare themselves, or they might say, oh, that's not actually what I meant. So I know when I'm interrupted, I can always, after they're done, say, actually, I wasn't finished, and come back in, or I can interrupt them and say, actually, I wasn't finished yet. Notice I had a little more tension in my energy. And there are times that not only in 2020, 2019, more and more folks are wanting much more direct, in the moment, interrupting oppressive comments. I have and do said, I need to stop you. I find that comment offensive. And whether you meant it or not, the impact on me is deep. And by the nonverbals, it's impacting the folks in the room. So we're going to pause. And I first want to start with the impact. And I know you're about to say that wasn't my intent, so I'm going to invite you to breathe. I've said very similar racist things before. My heart is with you. And in this racism workshop and in this organization, we have to learn to interrupt racist dynamics in the moment. So I know when I've said things like that, I wish someone had stopped me so I didn't do more harm. So I invite you to be present and breathe. And I'm going to ask the group, anybody else impacted? And I might have shared, as a white person, I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated that you and us as whites are still saying these things in this organization. And I'm wondering how many of the racist dynamics are happening. We're not even intervening. Now, that was all extroverted. That's pretty direct. But privilege to privilege, if the container's been created, we've got the group norms, or I'm like, oh no, that will not go down on my watch, then I hope seeing me do that. Let me be clear, people out of their marginalized identity, so especially, well, maybe even now as a lesbian, but 80s and 90s as a lesbian, me doing that, I wouldn't have been hired back. I may have been fired. People would have shut down. So I know that in our marginalized identities, to this day, as a female presenting identified person, who when I'm training shows up like this. So I think more people assume I identify cisgender. And when I'm then flying out, I'll be in my baseball cap and usually a hoodie, and I'll get called sir at least once a day. And so my gender expression shifts depending upon what I'm doing. So I get heard differently. Many organizations, the sexism, misogyny is so under-addressed. So all that to say, for me personally, I'm often in privileged identities, but still feel what it's like, oh, that was really oppressive. What do I do? Would a man do it? Or can a heterosexual come in now? So I do wait, but I will come in, but I'm a facilitator. Here's the thing. If you're in organizations, people in privileged identities aren't practicing skills, using them and speaking up, then you are a huge emotional tax on the folks who are in their marginalized identities. And they may only be bringing 20, 30% of their brilliance because they've got a wall to protect. And they may be in the cynical, why bother? Because every time I speak up, actually I'm reprimanded and undermined. So New York City subways, if you see something, say something. Even though I don't live there anymore, having people know we're an organization, and in this team, this department, when we see something, we're going to say it. We'll work to do it in a way that meets the person where they are and helps them learn and grow, but we will not tolerate microaggressions and unproductive meeting behaviors that actually have a negative impact on anybody, but particularly across marginalized identities. And in my experience, folks don't show up, afraid things will get out of control, we won't get the work done, hurt relationships, I'll be thought of as difficult, I don't know what to do. Training, development, supervision, high expectations will help an organization move in this direction so that people choose courage, and when they see something, they say something. I'm going to move on to the fourth PAIRS tool. You can only understand people if you feel them in yourself. And so that's a Steinbeck. The fourth tool of PAIRS is relating in. This is one I didn't learn growing up. I think I unconsciously did it. I'm kind of an empath, but as an intentional tool in difficult situations, it's one of the more powerful ways that when there's a dynamic and I want to engage with someone and have a dialogue, that instead of doing it in a way that has them feel I'm putting them down or I think I'm better, I'm right, they're wrong. If I can first relate in so they see that I see myself in them, and I might tell a story, I may give a quick example or just say, you know, I just did what you just did 2 weeks ago. I was in a meeting and this is what I did, and now I know the impact. Let's slow down. And so if you can learn to lean in before you speak, your panning dynamics, and before you choose to engage, you ask yourself, how am I just like this person? It could be in different identities, but how are you just like him? When have you said or done something similar or could in the future? I get grounded in more humility and empathy as I do compassionate accountability. Let me be clear. If you can't feel it yet, I hold people accountable. And there are ways to do it that increases the chances that folks will be heard, they'll engage, they will hear, they'll listen, and they want to change their behavior and stay engaged with you to keep learning. We can do things that shut people down, interrupt the behavior, but if you want learning and change behavior, I truly believe a lot of these skills will help us get there. For me, relating and helps me not to go to debate and come back too aggressive. I can be fight and useful, but if I go notice my hands even were different there. Relating in can help the person hear another way of doing it, where I'm going to counter, show another idea, they'll be much more a garden ready for planting. Now, if I really don't relate, then I can ask the group, anybody else relate to what's being said? It's a common thing I've heard. Who connects to what this person said? So I can invite people in and then say, now let's look back. Who also knows that this dynamic, maybe we were taught that was effective leadership, but who also knows the impact when we do these? So I can get the whole group engaged in general, and then I can come back to the person. Relating in first and then offer a different perspective. So the final PAIRS is sharing. I want to tell a story that a client told me. They were on a diversity council, and the whole organization was considering single stall bathrooms. And there was a lot of resistance to it, but he had hoped that, as he said, why he thought we needed to do it kind of conceptually. I believe we need to do it, and here's why. That would be enough. Well, the next 4 people, 3 were adamantly against, and the 4th person was kind of like, pretty good idea. I'm not sure if this is the right time, but I think we just need to do some more research. And that's just resistance coming out another way. So instead of repeating himself, thank goodness, chose this skill of sharing and decided to share a personal story. And so what he said was, a few months ago, my kid was home from college for a weekend and was watching something on Netflix or whatever. And as I walked by, they said, come on, have a seat. I'm like, all right. And then I said, what is it? And they said, it's a bunch of people from high school talking about real stories of as gender nonconforming and transgender high school students, the abuse, the bullying, the harassment that they experienced, and nobody interrupted. So Dad, just kind of watch. And so I watched as people told story after story, where there's locker room, classrooms, right after school, and then shoved up against the wall on school buses. Nobody, bus drivers, coaches, teachers, other students, and their family didn't support And then they talked about, while so much needs to change, if people could just have single stall bathrooms where we could lock the door and call them all inclusive, then at least I wouldn't be carrying this ever present terror of the violence I'm about to experience by going into a multi-stall bathroom. Well, that stole my heart. And to be honest, I still don't get it. And I still don't understand. He's telling me this story. He said, but I don't think it would be hard to do this so that our employees don't have to be sitting there, whether they're out as transgender nonconforming or not, worried about what's going to happen to them in the bathroom. And so I've already been thinking, I don't think it'll be hard to get one or two in each building that we can change the name to all inclusive or all gender and make sure everybody knows, put it on the website. And I think we can do this. Well, the story is energy shifted. And then he said, does anybody else relate? And then a few more people came in than hadn't before. So sharing the final tool of pairs. When things are difficult, escalating, getting out of our head, out of the win-win, win-lose, into our hearts, full in our bodies. And so instead of that tennis match, telling a story can be very powerful. Or you may want to then ask if anybody has a story that can help us understand more, or talk about your feelings. So you can share and self-disclose a story or your feelings. Like, as I read the comments of this employee survey and saw the focus groups, at one level, it made a lot of sense, but in my body, I was just enraged and scared. I was enraged that so many of our employees, particularly those who identify as folks of color, and particularly within that, Latinx and Black employees, our newer employees, this next Generation Z and millennials, that actually frightens me about the revolving door for people of color, and especially if it's an intersecting identity, and people of color in general. And then I was surprised that folks with disability, I don't think about it enough, and the data really hit me hard. I don't know how other people are feeling, but I just want to sitting in the impact of reading this data. And that was probably a minute, but I had several different feelings, many different group identities, marginalized, and can take us out of, it's not that big a deal if people are in resistance, to use all my privileged identities to get the group really feeling and focused and concerned, sense of urgency even, about where we are. And there's so many others that we can talk about on how to do selfless instrument in the mini course, but clearly sharing about, asking people how you're impacted or talking about how you're feeling can get you and others out of the head, into the heart, and get into some common ground and empathy and understanding and help us shift. We have to have people learn these tools and skills, practice them, so that they choose courage, say something, and are brave enough to start a conversation that matters. Margaret Weekly. And again, if there's very extreme dynamics, all these tools can be helpful, but if you're listening to me going, yeah, but, then how have you been working with HR? How have you been working with leaders looking at performance management and coming in and having those conversations about, and discipline, and doing some of those team conflict development and or very directed team resolution, which is a whole different skill set, related but very advanced, and then leadership coaching to help, and leadership development to help them have those conversations that are very clear and direct, partnering with HR. So what I want to do in the second half of this webinar is now look at, all these tools are great when I'm feeling good, rested, passionate, present. I can access them and choose, but when I'm stressed, overly tired, I've triggered myself, I'm getting sick, the national dynamics have me, it sounds passive. When I'm choosing to feel triggered because of all the cumulative impact of national dynamics, international dynamics, fear, rage, anger, depletion, then if I'm carrying all of that cumulative impact, I react less effectively. So I want to focus now, the second half of this, us. How can we be present to our emotions when we're triggered? A few skills to de-escalate so that we can have thought and our emotions to give us information as we're panning the room, and we're not adding fuel to the fire. So the first skill is get really clear. What is a difficult situation for you? Is it the group dynamics, your fear of emotions? Is it specific comments and behaviors? And so I was in a meeting, we were discussing a project, and about 3 or 4 or 5 days before, I'd been meeting with this one woman who was a colleague, talking about some ideas I had. And she was like, those are great. So now we're in the fuller group. And she says, well, I have this idea. And it was like my idea. And I just triggered my ego. In the moment, I just was like, I can't believe she stole my idea and presented it as her own. I'm sure there's a lot of past life, maybe past life, but current life decades ago where I had a similar dynamic. Ooh, it just hit me. I actually used other people's material and put it into material that I shared without giving credit. It was 4 decades ago. Didn't appreciate or understand very early 80s. And so I realized it's a trigger for me because she represented what I've done and the harm I've done. New insight in the moment. Back to my example. So I started spinning. I was pissed, irritated. And I was just thinking about how I was going to talk to her about it later. And what happened was, found out later that 2 sentences after I triggered myself and shut down and was obsessing, she actually said, Kathy and I actually talked about this. It was actually her idea. But I missed all that because I had so deeply triggered myself. So if I had more awareness, like I just got real time of what are my deeper triggers and do some healing work, then in that moment, what I could have done is noticed, it's a hot button, but I'm not a 10 out of 10. It's like a 2 or 3, 4. So I might have paused. And then I could have entered and I said, I agree with you. When we talked about it a few days ago, we just kind of took this idea and built on it. And she's like, yeah. And then she could have said, yeah, it was your original idea. So I could have engaged differently, navigating myself. And to be honest, she gave me credit, but I was gone by then. When I'm centered and clear, I can think of ways to come in. Even if she hadn't done that, I could have come in a way to say, yeah, I know I've been thinking about that for a while. What else would you do besides what we talked about on Monday? So I could just gently voice what's going on and then invite her in. But if I'm already stressed or I'm caught off guard or this is a second or third time, maybe not her, but somebody has taken my idea, I'm at cumulative impact, I'm far less likely to react in ways and I might miss an opportunity to help the group be innovative and instead turn it into it's personally about me and you wronged me and I'm a victim here. All very familiar places which do not help the organization move forward. Now, let me be clear. If this is a pattern, not only at the individual level, her, but the culture and climate, then that's a different intervention, a different conversation about honoring people's creative work, who gets credit for what, because mostly folks at the higher in leadership take credit and they get the credit, and folks who are doing the innovative work, implementing work, often more marginalized identities are not given the same kind of appreciation, recognition, and therefore aren't seen as high performers that they are. It's all got systemic dynamic. So whether it's an offensive joke for you, gossip, backstabbing, unproductive sarcasm, condescending, arrogant behaviors, left out of the loop again, you're in a meeting as female presenting, and once again, your white male direct report is assumed to be the leader. Key decisions made without your input, and you've got to implement. Whatever it is, what are your hot buttons that you feel intense, moderate to high intense? And then how do you typically respond? So first step is, what are the difficult situations for you? Why do you feel it's difficult? And so the next steps, what I'm going to share is how do you recognize those hot buttons so that you respond effectively before you do something you later regret. When I'm in the thick of a difficult situations, I forget this. I just feel powerless and I'm just going to react. But the truth is, between the stimulus and the response are a whole bunch of steps. In my cycle, I have 7 total steps. First one is, what's the stimulus? And it's not till 6 that I actually do and say something outside or non-verbally. And so I love this Viktor Frankl quote. Between the stimulus and the response, there's this place. And in that place is our power to choose our response. That's where our freedom lies. That's where our growth and freedom lies. So it took me a long time to learn this. It was actually at University of Massachusetts Amherst with Doctors Bailey Jackson, Barbara Love, Jerry Weinstein were particularly mentors that helped me realize a lot of the tools and skills that I initially learned. And I love this, Robert Conklin. It's not the situation, the stimulus. It's actually our reaction to the situation. It took me forever to get this, and I still want to blame the person or whatever. What I know is if I'm going to a movie and I'm watching the movie and I'm just angry at what they're talking about, but somebody over there is crying and somebody there is snoring, sleeping, and someone behind me says, this is boring. Same stimulus, different reactions. It reminds me, stimulus clearly might, in a meeting, in a conversation, a policy practice needs to be interrupted, but how I show up, my energy is the key to how I respond. That's going to move towards more effective resolution or more tension, conflict, fuel to the fire. We're not puppets to our emotions. We're not puppets to other people's behaviors. We can choose in the moment. We're not pre-programmed robots, pre-programmed robots. But first, we got to understand what's going on. So what are your hot buttons, the things that tick you off, scare you, have you move into the stress reaction? So what gets under your skin where you might shut down, overreact? When you're feeling good and you're surfing, then something happens in a snap and you crash, unexpected. And these are signs that I'm triggered. His fault, her fault, their fault, not my fault. I know I'm triggered when I start spinning. I coulda, shoulda, woulda, they shoulda. I'm presently experiencing life at several WTFs per hour. I love this quote. I feel stuck. The group is stuck. That's usually when they're stuck. And usually people are triggered and we try to force it. Let's come on, as opposed to, I'm feeling stuck. Anybody else? What's the stuckness about? Just moving into it. By the way, of these three, most people love the cow. Too often, if I'm confused, puzzled, baffled, lost, I push instead of pausing and really going within to see what's going on. Why am I feeling this way? What's going on around me? I know I'm triggered when I say to myself, dear karma, there are a few people I know you have missed. Could you catch up with them? I love this, Ambrose Pierce. Speak when you're angry. You'll make the best speech you will ever regret. And when I'm exhausted, empty, cynical, depleted, and I'm looking for an exit. Those are ways that I know so many triggers are happening. And if it's happening to me, I know it's happening to others. That's when we need some more organizational intervention. But the problem is most of us react at step 6 before we even know we're triggered. So what I'm going to do is kind of slow down and give you some tools that literally in the moment you can use so that you can intervene in yourself before you cause more harm and respond in a way that's effective, aligned with core values. So first step, what are your warning signs? Mine are, I get this grrr, or sometimes I literally sit back. Or if you see me do my neck a lot, I notice unconsciously I'll do that. My wife says I do this, put my hand over my face. So there's tons of ways that I'm aware. I feel my heartbeat and I feel like I can't breathe as deeply. What I've noticed sometimes, especially when I'm facilitating, is I start walking towards the person and I get more clear, enunciated in my language. I've been told I point my finger. That's usually my high triggers, but that's what I'd love you to do. When you're just mildly have a hot button, what are some of your warning signs? Medium, if we do a scale of 0 to 10, so kind of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, especially 9, 10. What are your signs? Do you have a certain look? Now, if you're like, I don't really know besides the normal ones, my face flushes, I fidget a little bit, ask the people you work with because I guarantee you they know. And when I'm doing some training in an organization, it can be really fun to have somebody, particularly a higher level person, say, I want to know how you know I've hit a hot button or I'm beginning to get triggered. And folks will brainstorm and it can shift the energy of the room. We start laughing. The person's like, yep. So you can teach about triggers while you actually have the group develop the capacity to get honest and authentic. So ask the people you trust and or a whole group. Ask the people you live with, you hang out with. I guarantee you they will know. Now, you know this happens. Our brain is so complex, as they've been studied for decades probably. We have the part that, quote, we think out of the, or maybe it's up here, the neocortex, I don't even, but it's that, the red thing in the middle, the reptilian complex. Some people call it the amygdala, the reptile brain. Millions of years ago, maybe even, it was needed because there was danger everywhere. Animals still is helping people go into fight flight. Today, there's rarely danger. There is. There are times that people are, pulled over, racially profiled. There is emotional danger in the organization with harassment. So I want to be very clear. There are still times that there's threat and danger. I just talked with one organization and I'm like, as you've described these three departments, there is blatant hostility, harassment going on. These are some of the most extreme dysfunctions that's going to need a significant intervention. So there are organizations that you want to be fight, flight, freeze, operating all the time, but it's exhausting because our amygdala does not know what's a real or perceived threat. And so most things that happen that I would call unproductive behaviors or microaggressions can re-stimulate in me a huge fight, flight, freeze, you're in danger of being killed. So what happens is our body is just shot through adrenaline, cortisol, I believe. It's a new thing I'm learning. And we react in ways that's fueled by this reptile brain as opposed to a balance between our emotions and the way we can think clearly. So here's two pieces of data that I was just doing a little more research. And one is the amygdala responds, the reptile brain responds 100 times faster than the cognitive thinking part. So that's why I'm already doing and saying things before I have any idea it's happening. And that's why I need to be conscious and present and make sure I'm doing all the healthcare, self-care, so that I'm not distracted. I'm really present when I'm doing my work. And emotions hijack, again, our ability to reason. Emotions hijack. So instead of me driving the bus and with emotions and thoughts, I'm deciding how to respond, my 7-year-old jumps in, throws me in the back of the bus, and my 7-year-old is driving the bus, me, not a child, but my old self, who was re-triggered, reactivated into unresolved issues from 7, 8, 9, whatever it is, driving the bus. One research said it takes nearly 20 minutes to go from emotionally triggered, intentional stress release to get your cortisol down, your adrenaline down enough so you're balanced thinking. And I actually think it takes much more. At least when I trigger myself, it can take me a long time because I keep it's like you got a bruise, you keep hitting it. I keep talking about it. So deep breath. So what are the characteristics? The first part of the webinar, you've heard a lot of it, but here's what my research shows. Conceptually, some people learn this way. So think of a recent event and see if you can relate. You don't have to have them all, but see if you can relate. How many of these? Was it an unexpected wave of emotion and intense emotions? And was it disproportionate to the stimulus? When I'm driving down the road, somebody cuts me off, I can feel irritated. There are other days that I am using all kinds of creative language, screaming, hitting my steering wheel. It's not because the person cut me off, unless they cut me off so much I had to swerve and I almost caused an accident. But most of the time they're cutting me off and I'm just irritated, not it's endangering. Some days, mild emotion, and others disproportionate to the stimulus, cutting off. That's when I know more is going on in that moment than that one incident. Yes, that incident I want to address, I have reasonable emotions out of, but if my emotions are this big, how about disoriented, distracted? Did you find yourself not able to think clearly, losing your place, out of control, overwhelmed? Sometimes I get so much emotion, I am just frozen, don't know what to do. I'm de-skilled. Another day, I could have handled that situation effectively, but in that moment, I'm reacting less effectively. Or the first time I have a situation, I'm usually de-skilled. I'm like, I've never done this before, and I might try a few things, but it's after 2-3 times, and I know, like, I know how to do this. Requiring extra effort, clearly, focus, attention, all the skills we're talking about to get present, distinguish what's really going on. What are my stories? It's step 3. So, definition of a trigger can be useful. And let me be really clear. The language has become much more part of how people talk. And sometimes people are using to say, I'm triggered, therefore we can't talk about it. Or what they're really saying is, I'm uncomfortable, which I have as part of the scale from 0 to 10. But we can't have learning if folks aren't mildly or medium uncomfortable. And so, improves identity. Someone said, I'm triggered. If we shut down and stop, as opposed to, well, tell us more. Well, it feels like you're picking on whites. Well, tell me more. Actually, when anyone uses that language, that's the time to go into asking and just say, well, tell me more and help me understand. And I think too many people are using it to not have engaged dialogue, learning, change. So I've mentioned this kind of 0 to 10. If you notice, this goes from 0 to -10, as well as 0 continuing to +10. Dr. Martha Beck's work, life coaching, I went through her certification program. It's the first time I saw this concept that I'm applying here. And so you can have mild emotions and still think pretty clearly. Medium, for me, maybe not. Intensity, if I get to 7, 8, 9, 10, I'm often out of my body, watching myself do and say things I clearly will regret. And that could be shutting down. It doesn't have to be the fight mode I often go into. In my research, in 30 whatever years ago, is that right? Ooh, it's about that. Ooh, it is. Oh my goodness, breathe. As well as everything I've done since. I bet 95% of the examples have been microaggression, systemic oppression, and 5%, so those would be emotions like embarrassment, anger, shame, rage, guilt, fear, anxiety. Whereas 5% of the stories that I hear when people are distracted, can't think clearly, don't respond effectively, have been, quote, positive emotions, like they just got a promotion and they're not paying attention to their current job because they're off, right? Or they're getting a new relationship and they're in love, and so they're just not able to focus and they say and do things. So, but vast majority of the time, it's what folks would say are unproductive emotions that do not feel good in our bodies, and our behaviors from other people when we're triggered usually aren't good. So again, a few times I've been at 8, 9, and 10. I could tell you stories. We will in the mini course, where fully triggered and incredibly effective. But most of the time, I'll say and do things that aren't useful. So it's not stuff and feelings, it's how to navigate them and ride the wave. So it can be useful to look at, what are your unproductive behaviors? How do you generally react? I've already mentioned fight a number of times. Do you move into the situation? Maybe you come off more aggressive, more telling, more teaching, right, wrong energy. You raise your voice, you might explode, push your point over and over. You're like competing at all costs, sarcastic comments that are weapons as opposed to useful humor. And you're trying to control, arguing, debate. I hope you saw yourself in some of those. A lot of folks flight, and I've done all of these. So we move away as fast as we can. And that might be the fragility, whether it's white fragility that Dr. Robin DiAngelo has popularized with her writings and book. Getting defensive, withdrawing, but there's all of these are fragile, whether it's privileged or marginalized identities, mostly privileged. Getting really guarded. People in marginalized identities, the survival skills to have a wall up and hold back and like, I'm out of here, because if I say it, it's career limiting or career ending. So there are strategies, survival, that might have been learned from marginalized identities that may not be useful in the moment, but if we're reacting from privileged or marginalized in unconscious automatic pilot, may not be useful to us or the organization. I watch people smooth over conflict. I've done that. Try to change the subject quickly, and then I still move quickly to humor when I feel triggered and I want to move on. Instead of slowing down and saying, I'm noticing I'm trying to make a joke. And I want to not and just kind of pause and how are people doing? How are we doing right now? Freeze. I don't know what to do. Most people who come to my workshops are like, I get some of this, but I don't know what to say. So I hope the first part of the webinar was useful. Get stuck, can't move, blank out, immobilize, may zone out, you're frozen. And then one that I believe I made up, flounder, where you're moving all over the place. Babbling, you're on tangents, you try something else, kind of a stream of consciousness. Often maybe give contradictory because you're not fully in your body, and you may, for me, I'm trying something, but if I were to center, I might get more insights, guidance on what would be useful in the moment. Or I could just say, I'm noticing I'm floundering and don't know what to do right now. Anybody else? And I've done this several times in the last year. Does anybody have an idea what could be useful right now? And someone will say something, I'll look around the room and I'll get some, then I'll follow that leadership, because if I'm floundering, I'm usually not clear. All of these stress reactions usually not very productive and could be a new trigger for others or yourself as you're kind of understanding the cycle. So we've done a lot around step 1. What's the stimulus? We're going to now do all the other steps. I've been talking a lot about step 6, how we react, and then 7, how our reaction impacts others. So I'm going to slow down and do 2, 3, 4, and 5 in a little more detail. I used to believe I was triggered, out of control. What came out of my mouth or what I did wasn't my responsibility. It just happened. And I used that to justify my triggered reactions that were harmful. Today, I no longer intend to do that and use it as an excuse. That I intend to, first of all, do my best showing up. And if my behavior causes some harm, I will come back and explore the impact to do amends. Understanding this helps me feel that I can have some navigating control and I'm not giving away all my power. So the first step is, what are your common triggers? And so identifying those, so you're more aware, you can anticipate and be prepared for them when they happen. So what are your common triggers? I have a list in the book, I think 55 to 60. You'll get something in the mini course, which is about 100 plus. And so having folks on that 0 from -10 to +10, but it's usually -10 to 0. How emotional reaction is it? What are they? And then by group membership, does that increase or decrease your emotional reaction? And so if someone doesn't follow my instructions, the first time I notice it and then I'll just repeat myself and I'm like, I'm not always clear. Or sometimes in the Myers-Briggs, people that are sensors, I have trouble saying things in ways they hear clearly at first. I'm like, okay. If it's a second or third time that somebody that same group identity, particularly if they have privileged identities, does it, then I'm like at a 6 or 7 minus, because I'm like, there's more going on here than my clarity. If I'm working with colleagues and there's just low quality work, if they're new to the team, I have a lot more compassion because I know I didn't used to have all these competencies. So I might be a 1 or a 2 and I'll do more coaching. But if it's a colleague that I've worked with a lot and or I'm responsible for it, and then I think it's going to make me look bad, notice my ego, or it's going to impact my reputation, then I'm a much more medium to high triggered and then triggered into fear. So first step 1, what are your triggers and how do you generally react? And what are some complications or complexities by group membership or cumulative impact that has you shift that? And when you do those, what are your 4 F's? You can start to integrate that. How do you tend to respond ineffectively? I want to spend a little more time on roots because this is the area that I think I'm bringing to the conversation. Other people have too, but people tell me that this is a significant part that they learn when they read their book or go through courses with me. What happens is when a situation, step 1 happens, our intrapersonal roots get re-stimulated and we hardly never know it. The situation is like a match, but a match will go out if it doesn't have fuel. And so our roots are the tinder or the paper that gets that flame going. And it's kind of, I just got the metaphor of roots, you're adding it on like wood. And so then it just really can flare up quickly. We may not ever be aware of what roots have fueled our unproductive reactions until we do some healing work. And that could be in all kinds of ways we'll talk about in the mini course. But it's taken me years to keep digging to find out what are some deeper roots and general are fueling, and what's the pattern of cumulative impact roots that impact me. So let me tell you a quick story. I wish I could tell you this only happened once, but I'm training, and in the back of the room, about 80, 100 people, is a table of all folks that mostly present white and present male. And they're laughing so loud, I can hear it in the front of the room. Some people are turning and looking back. I see a couple of them looking at their phones, turning to talk to each other. I just triggered myself. I was tired. Let's go through these. I was having current life issues. I was done with the national dynamics. By then it was 2, if not 3 years of impact of the current administration. And I was also feeling that day really committed to wanting to help this organization because of the blatant racist, sexist dynamics they're having. I was tired and I didn't sleep well. So all that was going on for me, current life issues. I was at cumulative impact, not only from people that looked like them recently, but also I tried a couple times to bring them in very indirectly. So I was kind of done. And I told you a story about that recent Zoom call where a white guy I felt was arrogant, disrespectful to me in a very smiley way, which actually irritated me a bit more. Also, Me Too has been more conversation about sexual harassment, sexual assault. Harvey Weinstein just was, a week or 2 ago, not indicted, but something happened. So it's back on the national news. So all of this kind of background noise in us can be there, cumulative impact, the same person doing it and or same dynamic recently. Old issues. This is where I have to dig a lot more. It's like, who does this person remind me of? But old issues, when I asked myself, preparing for this, I was like, oh, I'd be talking to the dinner table, and my dad would turn while I was kind of not quite done or not say anything after I finished, and look at the only other male at the room, my younger brother, and ask him what and I'm just like, but it happened in staff meetings that men would often talk to men, my ideas would plop. So these are kind of older issues that could be re-stimulated, current match, but all these roots are still right there. I may not even know. Fears in the situation I shared, they're not going to learn. The organization needs to change. And if people are distracted by their behavior and I don't address it, will they think I'm a bad facilitator? Maybe I'm a bad facilitator. Maybe I don't know as much as I think I know. Maybe I'm not. See how I'm just spinning? Hurts my reputation. Maybe they won't have me continue to work with them. So all kinds of fears that I can spin out to. And if I'm on that unsettled energy, then I'm not going to be able to choose a response that's useful. This one I love, Marshall Rosenberg and Nonviolent Communication, NVC. It's been around for decades. I wish I'd found it before I did my dissertation, but it wasn't until 10 years ago I kind of was able to start to learn with them. So I do cover it in the book. So this idea that we all have human needs, and you'll see a bunch around the screen there. And everybody deserves to have these needs met. And we can feel triggered in the moment if our personal needs aren't getting met or other people's needs aren't getting met. But that's what we value. So in that moment, respect. I didn't have those men respecting me. I didn't have them respecting the group's learning. There was less learning and growth happening for them, particularly was my story, and for people around them who were distracted. And just basic human consideration. Everybody deserves to have their needs met. And so this disrespectful treatment. And I really value mutuality, that we all work together for the highest good of all. And they were just not working with me. So I was just pissed. The next one took me a while to get honest, but these are ego-driven desires. Source of these, codependency and 12-step work has been one source of these for me. So in that moment, I wanted control and to assert my authority and a little more approval and thought of, status, like an admiration, like I'm a good facilitator. So when I've re-triggered those needs in an unhelpful way, because having some responsibility and things moving along is useful, power and control, for me, that's when I know I'm not coming from a good place to react or respond. And then this last one from my research was really powerful, to get the root of, do I have any biases, assumptions that I'm bringing in with me or I'm making in the moment. Expectations, shoulds, judgments of others. And in this case, I identified some. I realized people should always listen to me. It's not a fair should, but I had the, and it's not like I'd love people to listen to me. It's like they should, and they should never be on their phones. And men are generally sexist and disruptive. And so that was the bias I had. And I didn't know this. I chose in the moment not to respond. I just started wandering through. And as I got closer, they stopped the behavior. And then we're moving to a break. So I broke and then I just hung out there and just kind of chatted with them and asked them how they were doing and what they're learning and ideas they had for what's next. And what I noticed is their behavior stopped. 100 people to do something direct is usually not. It's going to go underground and resistance is going to come up. I'm grateful that they knew I knew. And I developed more relationship over the break. So for whatever reason. So that's roots, step 2. The roots literally fuel a lens through which our whole body fuels how we make up a story. And what we think is occurring may be very different. When I'm triggered, I'm making up all these stories. So the facts, white men were turning and talking to each other, is different than the story I made up, which is these men are so sexist, disrespectful. They're trying to undermine me, hijack the workshop. They're dominating, resisting. That story, if I'd stayed there, would have then fueled all kinds of swirling and more distractive thoughts at step 4. Because at step 4, what we end up doing is physiological reactions, emotions, and then more spinning. And so, luckily, they were in an activity and I did some deep breathing at step 4. So I was able to see what was going on and not react too quickly. At 5, we choose our intentions. And I have that in quotes because usually, again, it's an unconscious. And if I had not been able to get more present, my intention would have been to put them in their place, embarrass them, and make them learn and listen and show me the respect I deserve. Well, those intentions would not have fueled a useful reaction at step 6. So talking to them while I was walking towards them, I was saying things to myself like, I wonder what's going on. You know, there's times I've been texting, I've leaned over to talk to somebody, or I found something funny that nobody else did. So let me just check in with them over the break. Those mantras help me shift from to maybe like a 4 or 5. And then I can present, facilitator interaction well enough that I don't think they knew I was triggered too much. And I sat down, and then as I talked to them more, I got more empathy, connection. So that also helped me de-escalate a bit. At 6, we either do the knee jerk or we can intentionally choose, as luckily I was able to do in this situation. So I hope the overview of this, because if we do a knee jerk or even if we do something useful, that then impacts other folks. Might help learning, might help group dynamics. But if I do a knee-jerk, unproductive, triggered reaction, then other folks are triggered and the cycle just continues. So I hope it was useful to kind of see the overview and realize instead of feeling out of control or powerless, in any moment we can figure out where are we on the cycle and therefore how to intervene on us so that we intentionally choose a response aligned with needs and our core values. But we have to be present. So for the rest of the webinar, I'm going to show you some tools and skills that are aligned with these folks. Sam Killerman and Meg Bulger came up with the traffic circle, triggering event traffic circle. One day, Sam gave me a call and said, we're using your material in our Train the Trainer workshops, and we're writing a book called Unlocking the Magic of Facilitation. We'd love to use your material in the book. And I'm like, yeah. And he said, because we kind of built something new on it, we wanted to run by you to see what you think. Well, he told me about it. I'm like, oh, love it. And can I use it in my book? So luckily, the timing was right. It's in there. So it's this idea when you're ever been on a traffic circle, either driving or you're being driven and you just get stuck going around. Well, that's what it's like. It's being stuck in the triggering event cycle and you just don't know what you're doing. But if you know where you are, what step you're in, there are tools literally to each step. And so here's what I'd like to share. If you know and you can recognize your triggers, so what are my warning signs? You know what your hot buttons are. So you're like, oh, this feels familiar. You can literally pause, breathe, and do a systems check. How intense are my emotions? That question itself will get you out of the moment and reflecting. And that's what you've got to do to get just a little space so you can intervene on yourself. Where am I? And then you want to do a whole bunch of stress releasing emotions. How, get it from really high down just enough so you can. So what are your favorite? As a team, as an organization, you all can share that individually and collectively. So whether you're breathing, you're taking a break, I'll tell people turn to a partner and just, what are you learning? What are the questions do you have? And then I'll go in the corner, breathe, change my thinking, do mantras. This is happening for a reason. This is okay. I can do this, whatever it is. During a break, I may just zoom out to a restroom, or they're in a small group. I'll hit a restroom. I can't tell you how many times I've prayed in restrooms. Now, some people may not pray, but for me, it's very powerful just to or I'll just say, what am I supposed to be doing right now? Which is kind of a prayer, but it's kind of a meditative talk. When I'm in front of people and like doing that occasionally, you saw me do with my neck, or I'll squeeze and release my toes or roll my feet. Anything, if it's really under the table, clenching my fist and releasing things, but anything that can help me shift my emotions, my physiological reactions, and just lower that barometer enough. And a powerful way at step 2, roots, is to ask yourself, why am I feeling this way? What else is going on that has me feeling this way? And so you're like, wow, I'm at cumulative impact, but why? And so what I'm going to do is share with you the key questions that I teach and train about and that literally I use if I'm present enough to ask. And so if I'm in like, wow, what's my current life situation? So if I just pause and ask myself, how might the current dynamics be playing out, impacting me right now? Or the root cumulative impact. How is this connected to recent events? Am I in cumulative impact? Just asking it can give me that space, watching myself as opposed to stuck in it. Who does this person remind me of? Cumulative impact. A related one really is the third root, which is old, unfinished business, is what person or situation feels familiar? Again, the person in front of me could be an ex-person, but it's like, who do they remind me of? And all of a sudden, I'm back at the dinner table with my dad, or I'm at a graduate course and a professor. So if you just get quiet and ask yourself, often your higher self will give you some ideas. When have I felt similarly? All these will help me, particularly I'm in step 3. What are some fears I'm carrying into this? What am I afraid could happen? What could I lose? Can help you particularly in the 4th root of fears. The unmet needs, as simple as, what are my unmet needs? What am I valuing that's not being honored? What are people's needs that aren't being honored? And then asking, am I in my ego? Control, status, belonging. And even though belonging is good, it's like, I have to be liked, I have to be. So am I overdoing any of my needs in my ego? And then finally, expectations. What are my shoulds? Do I have any judgments? What biases am I bringing in? And so all of these can be helpful to ask yourself. And to be honest, you could just have taken pictures of these and put them on one slide, or because that's a cheat sheet, a tool in the moment. You're triggered. You're like, why am I feeling this way? At step 2, you can get off before you then make up a story. If you're like, I feel this way because old stuff, cumulative impact, I'm in fear, shift all that. Therefore, I can show up present in the moment. Now, at step 3, again, most of these are unconscious, but if you practice these, I know I can interrupt very early around roots in step 3. Because what step 3 is you're telling yourself a story. What's the story you made up? And so to get off at step 3, I'll tell you a quick story. New York City, when we lived there, traffic is horrendous. At least it was for me. I had to get across town to get to an 8:30 meeting. So that meant I wanted to be able to get up about 6:30. So I wake up with a start. I look over and it says 8 a.m. and I'm like, oh no. So I wake my wife up and I'm like, I can't believe I missed. I mean, I'm just like frantic. I'm throwing off the covers. And she says, put on your glasses. So I did. And it said 5 a.m. So when I thought it said 8 a.m., I triggered myself all kinds of emotions of fear, anxiety. I'm going to miss the meeting. They'll never hire me. I won't get a chance. All kinds of spinning. Woke her up. But when I finally did put them on, I changed my story because my next thought was, oh, I can go back to sleep. I have an hour and a half. So it's not what we see, it's how we make meaning of it. Step 3 is where we make up stories, usually assumptions, interpretations, based on a little data or maybe our misrepresentation. So it's not what you look at, it's what you see. A little Thoreau. Don't believe everything you think. That's actually a great mantra. Don't believe everything you think could interrupt you at step 3 of the cycle. So it's just kind of slow down and say, well, what am I thinking? Because I saw 8 a.m., but it was really 5 a.m. And so puppies. Some people see a puppy. I do. Adorable. I want to go play. Oop. I also sometimes think it's going to nip at me. Some people are like allergies, stay away. Some are like loud barking, don't move in next to us. And some might be like, I was bitten by a dog. I don't do dogs at all. Same stimulus, very different perspectives, stories at step 3. This kind of a metaphor helps me teach others and remember, oh, what story did I just make up? And so you can always change your story. You can ask yourself, what story did I create and what roots are fueling the story, fueling my reaction? That reflection where you're journaling it, you're having someone ask you those questions, you're just reflecting yourself can really help you get grounded, see what part is needing to be addressed and what part are you bringing from your life, current and past, that is complicating, literally shading your ability to see what's really happening in the moment. Now, you might be listening to this and say, but what if I was right? There have been times that my judgmental story was actually right. If I go back to the situation, I still believe those guys in the back of the room were intentionally disrespectful, didn't care what I was saying, and didn't want to be there, were resisting. Okay, we'll do a lot more of this in the mini course. So what? So what if I was right? Would I rather be right or effective? And so by changing my story to open the possibility that I became a little more curious, willing to engage them and get to know them a bit, I then reacted very differently. My emotions came down, my physiological re-triggered came down, and I engaged in a way that helped everybody, them. So, traffic circle. We can get off at any lane, including your reaction's not effective, it's re-triggering, and 7, people are triggered. There are ways to do that. We'll cover it more in the mini course. You can also see it in my book. So I do want to spend a little time because it's actually step 2, 3, and 5 that are the great places to get off. 4 by doing stress release, but 5 I didn't understand until I started doing the research. So it's like a game board. You're in a triggered moment, dysfunctional situation, difficult situation. You either choose, quote, positive, productive intentions or unproductive intentions. And so let me tell you another quick example, which I see more and more in this current national context, is whites just blatantly saying racist things. So I remember being in a workshop, blatant racist behavior. If I had thought, I'm going to put them in their place, embarrass them so they don't do it again, and I'm going to show them I'm a good white person, which are all unproductive intentions that I've done as a white person and could still slip into if I'm not paying attention. Luckily, in that moment, what I thought was, I've done this. All right, I'm going to intervene, but how can I do it in a way so they learn, the group learns, and people get to see me model effective engagement that helps another white realize the impact of their behavior and commit to not doing it again. So that intention set had me in a very different place to choose a response. And I'm happy to say, when I do that, usually whites are right with me. And so again, the core issue here is shifts can happen, but we are the key. And no matter how long you've traveled in the wrong direction, if you're at step 7 and you say and do things that fuels the fire or you create harm, we can always turn around and shift our intentions, decrease our emotional and physical reactions. We can choose different thoughts and choose a different behavior. In this case, to acknowledge the impact, ask for, if people want to say more, apologize, commit to making amends. We'll cover more of that in the course. All right. Traffic circle. Hopefully some of these tools will help you get off the cycle before you do harm and can help the organization get them going. That'd be great. If you just want one in your pocket, I love this Alan Locus, a Buddhist master teacher I got to learn from a couple times in New York. Am I about to speak and act as the person I want to be? When I have actually started a meeting with that in me, and or I notice I'm triggered, as soon as I do, am I about to speak and act as a person when I meet? I can't tell you how many times that helped me. I helped myself stop before I did something I later regretted. So all we've been talking about, the benefits and the outcome to the organization, if you really have these tools and skills taught, embraced, put into hiring practices as well as performance appraisals, then not only will you model more effective conflict, you'll teach it in how you're doing it, just more effective ways of being. And you personally, when you hit a hot button, you'll have the tools to de-escalate yourself. You'll be more open to feedback, less defensive, so you'll be able to help the group engage different kinds of feedback. I know I'm much more present and focused, so I can listen with empathy. I pick up on signals, nonverbals and emotional signals, clues that something's going on way before it gets this big in others. And I'm listening much more deeply because I'm not in judgment, right, wrong. Perspective taking. When I trigger myself, I can get into that arrogant, I'm right. And so when I'm more centered, I really can explore different perspectives because that's where I know innovation comes from. I believe it in my soul. And so we have more collaborative, collegial problem solving. It can still be tense, but we're in it together as opposed to lots of those power plays that are happening, hidden agendas. Creativity, and we're getting these 21st century competencies, especially for leaders in 2020 and beyond and change agents. That change is constant, and I think it's accelerating. And so all of these tools and skills will help us address what's going on now and our future so we're a better service to the people we serve and create inclusive, high-performing organizations. As you move forward, give yourself grace. We're always under construction. I am still learning. You saw me on this. I got a couple new insights. I am still learning how to navigate myself so I'm more effective, and especially new things that I'm seeing, especially in this national context, what I need to be learning so I can intervene differently and be effective in difficult situations. If you want something you never had, you'll have to do something you've never done. So I hope these two webinars, well, it's two parts, gave you enough tools externally and internally to get off the traffic circle and choose a response that really helps everyone live up to the organizational goals. I do have a checklist. You'll see it in the materials that are free. We'll use it in the mini course, beginning, middle, and end, because I'm designing the course to help you get some of these skills. And so you just may, as we're closing, go, wow, how effectively do I, 1 being rarely, and 10 being almost always, when there's disruptive, distracting, microaggressive, difficult situation behavior, do you effectively engage? How about when group members are in deep emotion, whether they're triggered out of marginalized identities and cumulative impact, they're triggered out of privilege, where they're in defensiveness and fragility, and there's just escalated quick energy and the fire and whoop, where's your capacity there? Can you recognize early warning signals that you're triggered and that others are? Can you navigate your own feelings so that you're not doing your work on the group? And then clearly, what are all your intrapersonal roots? Have you been doing the healing work? Can you recognize them in the moment? And do you have the skills in the present to get off the traffic circle? That's just some of what we'll do in the mini course. I want to remind you of my resources, not only Turn the Tide and the handouts that are available for free on the website, but my other 2 books, But I'm Not Racist, Tools for Well-Meaning Whites, and lots of resources there if you want to do whiteness affinity spaces. By the way, February 6th, I'll be doing a live radio show, Monday, 1 p.m. Eastern, and you can always find it on my website. I'm going to be putting all of my ideas at this point. How do you lead and facilitate whiteness affinity spaces? And I'll tell you then why I call them whiteness affinity spaces or caucuses as opposed to white. I also want to talk about that you can get in it for the long haul. And again, handouts that are free on my website. How do you overcome burnout and passion fatigue as change agents in an organization, particularly if equity, inclusion, social justice is the work you're doing? So other free resources you can have access to. And then my mini course. If you're listening to this going, this was great, and I want a cohort of learners. I want some people that live with Kathy 3 Fridays in a row starting January 31st, 90 minutes, and maybe some afterwards, depending on if people want to stay, starting at 2:30 Eastern till 4. I want to learn more and have the space to integrate. It's one thing to know it, the stories help, but what do I do if, and how do I teach this? So really going to be focusing on, again, leaders, managers. If you want to learn how to teach this as a supervisor, you're facilitating and you want these skills more in you. Or you're an individual contributor and you're like, I want to be a high performer and I know emotional intelligence and I want to get it in me. Would love to see you. You'll get an email off of this and you can sign up, and would love to see you then. If you have a whole bunch of folk, because you can do it individually, get 4 or 5 people all individually. If you have 4 or 5 plus folks and you want a group discount, just email me. You can be on my website, which is drkathyobear.com. Probably /contact, or just email me, Kathy at drkathyobear.com. And I'd be glad to come up with a discounted price for you. And again, these will all be recorded. So it'll be sent out so you can slow it down or do another piece again. Or, yeah. I want to close with this wonderful Dr. Maya Angelou. People will forget what you said. People forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. In difficult, toxic situations, when we leave them unresolved and unaddressed, people leave feeling in such ways that they're thinking about the revolving door and exiting. How do we show up with greater capacity, speak truth to power, intervene, get everybody skilled up so that people truly feel respected, valued, supported to be their best selves, and that the system, organization, departments, and teams are making meaningful change to create truly inclusive, high-performing organizations. Thank you for joining me on this webinar, and I look forward to seeing you. Oh, I've got one more coming up, February 11th, creating inclusive, high-performing teams. Will be a live webinar. Keep your eye out for that. And as always, you can sign up and you'll always get a recording. Thank you for your work in the world. Take care.